You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Folks, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Thanks for joining us again. Every single Monday, we're coming live to your ears. We hope it's sweet and not sour. At least I'm sweet and Matt Priest is sour. That's the way I'll present that.
Usually how it works.
2021, interesting year. It was the year where no one knew what a supply chain was. Then everybody knew what a supply chain was, and it became
Even your grandma.
And it became an excuse for being late to anything and everything. And if something went wrong, it kind of was just like, well, it's supply chain. It reminds me a lot, Matt, of No Child Left Behind with the school system. Anything and everything bad that happened with schools after No Child Left Behind, which is blamed on the program, right? It's like, oh, it's No Child Left Behind. It's like, oh, the school bell didn't go off. No Child Left Behind. And now, supply chain's the same way. It's like, well, we didn't get, supply chain. That's the excuse. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting year. And I think, we all know what the challenges are. And I think it behooves us to ask an expert about what's the runway? What are we looking at in 22?
Yep.
What are the other challenges that are coming up that we may not see that's coming around the corner? So who we got today?
Man, I'm super excited about this episode because sometimes we have executives and we have to kind of, be on our best behavior. But this one will be fun because we can kind of just let it all air out. And that's because Pete Mento, who is, I hope I'm reading this title right, Pete, but Head of Procurement and Commercial Excellence at Wayfair. I love it. I don't know what that means. You're going to tell me, I'm sure. But Pete, well, it's been a long time coming. Welcome to the Shoe In Show. I know you got a lot on your mind. You got a ton of hot takes. You're like the Jim Rome probably of supply chain. So welcome to the program and give us your first hot take.
And it have to do with your intro. So first hot take is I don't know if I'm the Jim Rome or the Alex Jones. So we'll have to start there. Jim Rome's a little better.
Jim Rome,
yeah.
Right?
And the second one is I think saying that we have to pull things out of executives. I don't know if that was like a backhanded comment that I'm unprofessional or something to that effect. So I'll take it, I'll take it as it comes. So as you mentioned in the, I guess I'll call it a compliment of an introduction. I do have a day job now, along with my sidekick gig that I'm still consulting, but not very much at all, frankly. I work for the forwarding arm of Wayfair. Most people don't realize that Wayfair does have a full service freight forwarding arm. The difference is all we do is move cargo for our suppliers. That's all. Nobody else. And this has become it's become the normal for e-commerce companies. You're going to have a hard time finding a major one that doesn't have a situation like this. In 2022, we're probably going to move somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 140,000 40-foot equivalent units. So it's a lot. Most people talking 20s, we talking 40s because furniture is big and bulky. And as you can imagine, the decision to do this 4 or 5 years ago turned out to be a pretty smart one. We locked into long-term rates. We locked into long-term contracts, and it is mostly tech-enabled. Very small group of people. We are moving all of this with less than 200 folks, and we really rely on technology to do it. My job is to do everything I can to get that capacity at the best possible rates, to look for ways to also get the best possible terms and contracts with our foreign CFSs, to help my partners, other directors, wherever I can on finding opportunities with customs house brokerage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm also involved in a number of special projects, partnerships, and the further digitization of our platform. I got to tell you, man, I'm just an old fart working with a bunch of brilliant young people. I walked in there and you think you know what you're doing, I mean, you know me, Matt, Andy too, as well. I'm pretty arrogant. I've got a rather high opinion of myself. And I walked into this .com e-commerce behemoth, and I'm working with a bunch of people that went to MIT, and they showed me what they had built with absolutely no experience in the industry. And it was as if I had come across a village of people who had been sent into the woods with a book of matches and folding knives, and they built skyscrapers. They had no idea what they were doing, but they had managed to come up with much more efficient, much more intelligent solutions to problems than a room full of my colleagues probably ever would have, just because they didn't know any better. And it's been a real humbling, but at the same time, just awesome ride. I'm having a great time, man.
That's amazing. I mean, you need those outside thinkers sometime to come in, right? We're so steeped in the industry. It happens in footwear too, right? A brand comes in, they don't know any better. They don't know about all the ins and outs of the footwear industry. They don't know all the players, and they just do things kind of blindly, but with a strategy in mind. And sometimes it works out well, and other times it doesn't. But you need that fresh blood in the system. But conversely, you're the fresh blood of Wayfair, right? So as you walk in the door and you see the skyscrapers made out of matches and knives, what are some of the things that you're bringing into the conversation to help drive a more efficient supply chain? And then from there, let's pivot to kind of what we're going to see in the new year, in this new year 22, about how long all the madness is going to go on and what you're.
Well, the first thing, I kind of took the doctor's attitude of at first do no harm. One of the people I worked with at Expeditors who I have a tremendous amount of respect for was a woman named Rosanna Esposito. I know she's retired now, but when I worked at Tradewin at Expeditors, I remember I met with her in Seattle and I said, "Can you give me any advice?" And she said, "The first thing you can probably do is not walk around like a gorilla and try to make everything the way you want it to be." And I've always taken that attitude, particularly as a consultant. When I've been consulting for 20 years now, so you need to walk in there and probably keep your mouth shut and your ears open for the first 30% of what you're doing, because most of what needs to be done is probably already being done, just no one's paying attention to it. And that has very much been the case. I was blessed with this amazing team. I mean, amazing team of people that work for me that are really doing great work. I just don't think people realized how good a job they were doing. So it was elevating that, and then maybe being systems and processes to it. The other side of it is putting some rigor into what they're doing, processes and into place. And then lastly, trying to legitimize the role of this idea of a BCO involving themselves as their own NVO and as a freight forwarder. People still look at us like we're a bug under a microscope, buddy. Like, what are you trying to do? We're not trying to do anything. We're doing it. And it's explaining to these forwarders and these carriers that this is what the future holds. We have the technology now where we can do it. And Matt, I mean, you've worked with Adele and I for a long time. We're big believers that it's only a matter of time before companies of this size will end up doing this themselves. The data is all there. The technology is all there. It's just, the time of the intermediary is beginning to fall apart because they've taken too much value, unfortunately, out of the system, and they've commoditized themselves. Well, we can build our own technology. We can hire our own experts, and we can build our own relationships because of the size of who we are, bud. So it's unfortunate, that many of my colleagues in the consumer side of things, the transportation consumer side of things, are unfortunately in a period of time where they don't have the volume to be able to take advantage of it like we do.
Pete, let me ask you. I mean, I think everybody hates carriers right now.
Come on
now.
Let's
talk about the carriers. How do you see like because obviously we look in years past and we said it's coming, right? The consolidations are going to keep happening, and all of a sudden we hit the point where we only have a limited amount of carriers for most people. Like obviously Amazon, Walmart, and these others are talking about how great their supply chains are. It's like, yeah, it's great because you own your own ships and your own planes and all that, right? So not bad if you control it yourself, but for everybody else who's got to buy space and get a little piece of the pie, how do we see the physical movement of goods going forward? Is it gonna consolidate further? Are new people going to come into the market and help ease some of the capacity issues? How do you see things physically playing out?
So Andy, you've you stumbled on one of my favorite topics, right? So, and I get to do it with some wonderful people because I, like much like the two of you, I'm sure, we're always getting caught in these conversations now where people suddenly know what we do for a living, right? They suddenly get it.
Yeah.
They've been watching that 2-minute snippet on the evening news where they talk about supply chain congestion.
Oh, it's the Art Vandelay, right?
Importer export.
Importer
And
exporter.
now because they've watched Lester Holt or whoever the guy is on ABC or whatever, they suddenly understand the supply chain and they want to talk to us about how they're going to fix it. And that infuriates me. And it's a good thing that I haven't really been drinking much these last 6 months. But for us, we look at it and we know that it's a problem stacked on top of a problem. And these issues have been on top of each other for decades. And what's beautiful about our industry, and I mean this, and I'm not being insincere, what's beautiful about our industry is we are constantly finding creative ways to deal with these stacking problems because we have no ability to really manage the problem. We can't create better infrastructure. We can't put more vessels into service. We can't manage labor issues. It's got nothing to do with us. We have to, I hate to be a 12-stepper here, right? But we've just got to surrender to the fact that we're powerless to overcome these problems. So we've got to manage the things that we can work on. And when I look at companies like Amazon, right, they're a major competitor of the company that pays my mortgage and my alimony. But, in reality, they were a company that said, enough, we're going to focus on the things that we control. And now I look at the company I work for. They said, enough, we're going to focus on the things that we can control. And I believe we're going to see more and more of that because if look at the three of us right now, the footwear industry. And we've worked a lot on this collectively over the course of the past 6 months. You have intellectual property right issues that are at the point where it's almost viral. You have the 301 issues that thank the Lord didn't really affect your industry, but they affected parts of the follow-on industry. Everything in for manufacturing and distribution that in a way end up increasing the cost of your goods downstream.
We got $1 billion thrown in for under 301. So it has impacted us. Yeah.
321 chapter 86, de minimis. That has a lot to do with the way that you're going to have to deal with your world. These are all these big, massive issues that have nothing to do with what that 2-minute snippet on the nightly news talks about, that the three of us could legitimately take each one of these labor issues, right? Crane speed, automation, lack of chassis, right? The fact that we have not had a major change to the innovation of the ocean logistics supply chain probably in 25 years. No real major innovation. There's a lot of logistics supply chain firms that are making technology that would say, oh, you're wrong, Pete. Well, yeah, whatever. Like you're all selling the same thing with a different packaging. But honestly, like where's the massive innovation? It's not there, right?
No, if we could have a panel at FTDC every year about where can we get more chassis? I mean, we could have had that panel for 25 straight years and it would have been the same answer every single year.
Do you ever work with her out in San Francisco? Beth Peterson has, or Beth Pride now, I'm sorry. Beth Pride. Beth Pride has a amazing consulting firm, boutique, not real big. I shouldn't say not real big. They're big enough. Trust me. She's got an incredible consulting firm. Mm-hmm. She sent me an email recently where she said, know anybody who'd be interested in supporting a container company that makes 40s and high cubes that stack. You could move more, like a number of these things empty. And I said, I know a million people that would love that, but I also know that the way the laws are written right now, that there are actual roadblocks that would stop the implementation of adopting this as a standard. And the road to getting it done is going to be hard. But you want to talk about making everyone happy. It's more environmentally friendly. It's a better green policy. We've been moving more with less. You would immediately change the calculus for ocean carriers because it would raise the rates on exports. I mean, all the great things that happen, right, that make them more profitable, which means that they can do more with less. It's just, everybody would love it. But how do I get everyone to sit down and fix that?
Let me ask you that, because that's leading into my next question, which has been in my head. You have the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2021 that's being bandied about right now in Congress, and our trade association, NRF, others have come out in favor of it. It
Right.
easily passed the House. The carriers are pulling us aside and said, "Hey, look, be careful what you wish for," because we were in this hyper kind of deflationary environment where we had long-term contracts, but the spot rates were more competitive. And guess what? We were honoring the spot rates and you were saving money, shipper. And now the table has turned. We're not going to say it hasn't. And so we're making bank right now. But don't do these federal kind of legislative things that alter the landscape for when we return back to the prior scenario, which we most certainly will, and just basically don't go down this road. But no one seems to be paying attention to that. And I can tell you, even in our board meeting recently, someone said, we're getting thrown all these policy proposals to change things right now, but it's hard for us to kind of figure out which of them are going to have long-term consequences that we don't like, which of them are going to make the landscape more or less competitive. And so how do you view these? You're a policy guy as well. How do you view these policies being thrown out? Like, how do we fix this? Let's fix it. Let's pass this law. And then 2 years from now, we're looking back and guess what? We're locked in some higher rates and we can't get around it. And, we have more transparency. Great. But I'm trying to figure out how do we kind of analyze these and digest them and then support.
Well, I got to get back to Andy's original question because in usual Pete Mento fashion, I went off on a George Carlin rant there because this is going to answer your question as well. Okay, we want ocean carriers to be profitable. We want them to make money. We want them to be able to invest. We want them to be able to expand capacity. We want more routes. And much of the problems that we're experiencing right now have more to do with the fact that there are only so many ships because for years they were in financial distress. And I would love to point at the carriers and say, this is all your fault. It isn't. This is more to do with economic pressures and the lack of real changes to infrastructure. And the fact that America is filled with people who want to buy crap they can't afford with money they don't have to impress people they don't like in the first place. That has more to do with it than anything else. God bless America.
Bless America.
Apple pie, right? So when we talk about these, these legislative concepts, you guys work on the Hill, right? How many things are more dangerous than a piece of legislation that's written as a knee-jerk reaction to public opinion? And what's more dangerous than trying to legislate something that is 100 years in the making as a problem, legitimately, and it's probably going to take 100 years to really solve with a quick piece of legislation to shut people up that doesn't take into account a global problem that requires global cooperation to fix. You don't solve this without Chinese cooperation, European cooperation, consumer cooperation, labor cooperation. And if you read the way that bill was written, I don't know what it's going to look like when it's done. Like when all is said and done, right? Didn't it just like blow through when everybody, like everyone but I don't know, was it 40 people didn't? How did it pass the first?
I'll pull up the vote.
It was like everybody was like, "Oh, it's wedding cake and puppy dog kisses. Let's all vote for it," right? But the reality is these shippers are
364 to 60.
A bunch of people probably didn't read it and they're like, well, I better not vote for it, right? So when I consider what's probably in this vote, folks just thought this is something I can, when I get back out there and I go and look what I did to try to work on supply chain congestion, vote for me, What's going to come out of this could be worse because I didn't see any metrics or math about how any of these policies are going to affect downstream logistics issues. No one asked us. I'm on the FMC advisory board. I've been there for a couple of months now. No one bothered to ask anybody there to do any sort of analysis on it. No one's bothered to check with anybody in labor to see how that's probably going to affect it. So I'm fascinated to see how lobbying money is going to deal with this in the Senate. I'm fascinated to see how over the course of the next couple of weeks, when I believe things are going to get worse in 2023, how this begins to push things left and right. I'm fascinated to see how the labor negotiations end up changing the tenor of the vote on this as well. So American public opinion is about whether or not we have straws for our Starbucks cups right now. It's not about fixing this thing for the next 100 years. You want to fix this? Read my Twitter post yesterday. Tell Elon Musk to build tunnels underneath Long Beach that go, all the way to Reno, and we'll build intermodal terminals 100 miles away from Long Beach Terminal. That'll actually make this better. Okay? Don't think we're going to fix this by a piece of legislation. You want to fix this? Start finding ways to intelligently bring carrots instead of sticks by getting Americans to find ways to purchase things that are made in America. Find ways to, you can't legislate patriotism. You just can't do it. So Americans have to be somehow given a reason to buy more American goods. A great example of that would be tax credits for companies that buy American goods. And I don't see that happening. Not purchase them or make them here, but purchase goods made in America. That would be a brilliant way to get that started.
Now, you said that in 2023 it's going to get worse, which is interesting. Does that then should it perk up executive ears to start thinking about how they diversify sourcing? Will that have any impact if they start to look at different places around the world for shipping and
Andy, I wish I had a simple answer for that. I think it really depends on commodity. When I think about footwear, and I am a sneakerhead, I'm an unapologetic one, and the amount of money that I spend. But before this call, I couldn't do it at 10 o'clock because there was a drop on sneakers I had to pay attention to, and this weekend, Nike had the cool grays and I had work to do. Okay. So, there's only certain places that footwear has made the proper investment to manufacture at such a scale that is profitable for them right now. And there are only certain places where entire industry can really depend on a supply chain right now. I mean, China, you've got to give them all the credit in the world and tip your hat, because they have put the necessary money and time and effort into building a supply chain that can support anything. When there was this great move to Cambodia, Vietnam, over the course of the beginning of the pandemic, and even prior to that, the first thing that shippers learned was, wow, these prices are great and the efficiency is great, but what do you mean there aren't enough ships that call here? What do you mean there's not enough airlift? Mexico is fantastic from a labor perspective, but getting raw materials there, problem. Congestion at the border, not as bad as congestion at the port, but still a problem. Dealing with cross-docking, it's a problem, the added frustration of compliance, it's an issue. Theft, it's an issue. Security, it's an issue. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. It's all trade-offs. I believe what's going to happen, and I could be real wrong about this one, Andy. I believe that there's going to be some people a lot smarter than me that are going to be forced to sort this out, that are going to sit down and they're going to come up with competent and creative solutions to overcoming these problems, because it's in their financial best interest for their shareholders. And they're going to find ways to make it work.
Yeah. Because I'll remind people what's happening right now is the common solution has been grin and bear it and add extra time, right? It's like, all right, add 15 days. Nope, not enough. 20, 30, 40 days to the development cycle. The problem is there's no more time to add because of the risk at sales, the sales point, right? If you want to talk about trend analysis and all that, with a consumer that's more empowered than ever, that wants what they want and they want something new, and you're talking about fresh product and new ideas that you're trying to put out there, it's riskier than ever to throw something out there that's going to fail. And you can't really have that. And it just seems like we're at a point where 60 days? All right. Then it goes to 80. Like, it just keeps, the development cycle keeps expanding, and that's the answer. And maybe that is the answer for a little bit of time, but that creates a whole new model for footwear in terms of how we, obviously FDRA just took over Market Week at Fannie. So we have all these buyers and sellers coming in. They're looking at advanced seasons, trying to make, does that then mean that 3-season advance goes to 4 or 5 seasons? I mean, am I crazy to think that in terms of how we're having to rearrange development cycles because of this?
Let me give you a worst case scenario. And this is why I believe that we're looking at a terrible couple of years This is going to take a while to fix. What you just described is going to create a very human reaction, which is to overorder to deal with longer supply chains by companies that don't necessarily have the ability to gauge or to deal with purchase order cycles. Like a larger company, like a larger footwear concern would probably, we would hope, be able to manage their supply chain, you know? So you're going to have medium, mid-market companies who are just going to say, over order. It's better to have the inventory here, to deal with carrying inventory, to deal with inventory taxes, to deal with additional costs, than to just be caught during a cycle when it's necessary to sell it without it. Okay? Well, great. Well, what does that mean? That means that warehouses are full. It means that there's always going to be, my dad was one of them, there's always going to be importers that leave product in containers because it's cheaper storage than going out and finding a new warehouse. Just want to choke them to death, right? And that causes demurrage. That causes a difficult time finding chassis, which causes another issue, right? But this is the second part of it that I think people really need to consider. All of this capacity, all of these ships, all of these containers and chassis, and the knock-on effect, which has caused a global supply chain crisis, and it is a crisis. It has all been caused by the desire of Americans to consume, because our economy really only had a blip. It had a blip. It went down. The stock market, the sky is falling. We're all going to die. And then it's all right. We'll have it delivered to home. Call Uber Eats and get the kids Indian food. It's all going to be good. You know, we'll have 17 different subscriber services on TV. I can work from home. You can work from home. We're all going to get vaccinated, put on a mask. We're all going to go out. It's all fine. Okay. The rest of the world, however, did not have as magnificent a recovery yet. I want you to imagine what capacity is going to be like when Europe begins to recover, when the rest of Asia begins to recover, dare I say when the Middle East begins to recover. And now what we're beginning to see with South America recovering. And these ocean carriers who have diligently been taking a lot of this fantastic extra profit and putting it towards more ships. There won't be enough ships to deal with extra capacity because, for one thing, they got a lot of ships out there they need to, for liability concerns, they got to scrap. And they're going to. And when they do, you're going to lose capacity in the marketplace. I don't think it's going to be like massive, but you're still going to have all the American consumption, even if it goes down 10%, 15%, all that American consumption competing with European and Asian and all the rest of the world with limited increases in capacity. This is why I believe that rates are never going to go back to pre-pandemic sizes. They're gonna be around that, I think BCOs are going to be lucky to be seeing that 4,000, 2,000 to 4,000 to 6,000 to 8,000, depending on the route. And you're going to have most American importers feeling like they won the lotto if they're buying stuff at 5,000 or 40. And that's where, for profitability and for growth, these carriers want to go. And it's going to drive more consolidation, which means less choice. Less choice means they can drive up the price. And while they're doing all that, they're going to buy more freight forwarders, which is going to take even more value out of it. And while all that's happening, what these people don't realize is it's going to drive more decisions like we made to take on the papering on our own, technology on our own, and doing this on our own, because we can't afford to be held captive by our vendors.
Yeah, and Andy thought I was a sour guy. So
I don't mean that. That's just jest.
Yeah, I know. So Pete, you're a comic book movie guy, and I can share that. And I am too. Andy's not. So I'm going to utilize this opportunity to use an analogy from one of the best scenes in comic book movie history, and that is the interrogation scene between Christian Bale's Batman and Heath Ledger's Dark Knight. And there's a scene there where Batman is pummeling Joker, and he just looks up at him and cackles and says, "There's nothing you can do with all of your strength." And I feel like that's where the federal government is right now with the supply chain, from the White House on down, trying to figure out what the fix is. You reference like the fix will come from people who have to deliver it to their shareholders. But what if it doesn't, right? What if we are just doing these things that are just Band-Aids And then guess what? A recession hits, demand plummets, and then everything kind of eases out of the system. It flushes out. We're like, oh, everything's back to normal. We can get our ships in. What I think that's more likely to happen than people actually getting together and solving a 100-year-old problem. That's just human nature, right? So what do we do with all of our strength? I don't know if there's anything we can do with all of our strength. I'm going to answer that with
two anecdotes because I'm that guy. So the first is, one of my favorite things to say to people is that Darwin did not say it is survival of the fittest. He said actually the species that will survive is the one that is the most adaptable. It's not the fittest. It's the one that changes. And when I talk to people now, particularly a lot of the young folks the young folks that I work with at Wayfair, they excite me every day because they are like silly putty. They are so malleable. You know, I am so irrationally rigid, man. Like, I'm a dirt worshiping hippie, dude. Like, I am the worst, you know, like my friends can't stand me because I am, you know, I'm a tie-dyed shirt away from following what's left of the dead, right? Like I'm the worst. But compared to people that are in their 20s, you know, I might as well be a Reaganite, you know? So when I meet with these people and I talk with them, I'll say to them, you know, how's the supply chain changed your lives? Or how's COVID changed your lives? They've got like dozens of things that they'll talk about where, you know, I put on LinkedIn the other day that I had to go to 3 Starbucks before I could get my morning coffee, you know? And I had an old straw in my Jeep and I just used that because they didn't have any long straws. And a woman I worked with said to me, like, I've stopped using straws a long time ago because I feel bad about using them, first of all. You know, I don't need them, she said, and all this stuff. And then everyone else is like, yeah, I don't need a straw. I'm drinking it at my desk anyway. What's the big deal? But that's human nature changes because of an inability of something. Here's another great one. Do you guys ever go to Bertucci's?
I was actually there about a week ago.
Okay. Bertucci's deal used to be that they would put one single black olive in the middle of their wood-fired pizza as a symbol that this pizza was good enough by the brick oven artist that made it for them. That pizza is no longer in the middle of the pizza, and I guarantee you, it's because
there's no more olives. There's no more olives in the middle of the pizza?
Because somebody at corporate was like, how much money are we spending on this stupid olive? And someone noticed it. Someone takes that olive and throws it on the tray and no one does anything with it. And like, enough with the stupid black olive. Okay. We can probably save like 10 grand a year. And that means that we can give, you know, somebody in the back who's scrubbing dishes all day and has the worst job at the place a raise. So how about we do that instead? Okay. Human nature is going to change some of this. And the other anecdote that goes along with that first part of my answer is, if you would have told me that I would have bought all of my Christmas presents for the many people in my life without ever setting foot in a retail environment, I would have thought that you were on the devil's cabbage, my friend. But this is my 3rd year in a row that I will not have bought a single thing, not a single stocking stuffer, not wrapping paper, not the tape that I'm going to wrap it with. I'll be damned if I'm going to set foot in a retail environment, because for a guy that was in sales for 20 years, I hate people. I don't want to be in a mall. Fa la la, pa-rum-pum-pum-pum. You can all go to hell. I'm not going. All right.
Well, it sounds like you need some devil's cabbage. And now that it's legal in most places, you can also probably order that online too.
Oh my God. And the second thing I'll answer to that is what I talked about before. Things like this idea that, you know, Elon Musk, here in New Hampshire, we have the Spalding Turnpike. We have a number of turnpikes. In the old days, before roads were paved, people would create roads. And they would say, here's my turnpike, pay me a penny a horse, a penny a carriage, and it paid for itself very quickly. I want you to imagine the tax breaks that man would get if he did it at a loss for the first 10 years, and the money he would make if he charged something for every container to do something like that. What it would mean if, when someone cracks the code on the technology side, it's like what Blue Cargo is doing with their stuff. You know, there are a lot of great pieces, and I'm tongue in cheek about Logitech. There is some good stuff. What people are doing with the Logitech to get through it. There will be people out there that crack the code, people smarter than me and you and the folks that are out there. I firmly believe that. I'm a failed stand-up comedian with a customs house broker's license that has some friends in the Senate, right? I got nothing but relationships and a good sense of humor to get me through life.
Yeah.
But there are brilliant people that will solve this problem and find a way to monetize it. And once that happens, man, the rest is house money.
All right. Well, we got some mix of doom and gloom with some mix of optimism. And I think it behooves us to remind ourselves that free enterprise is a great thing because it's in some ways a living organic thing that will ebb and flow on its own, right? The consumer will change its mind. It'll adapt. It'll switch, and then we'll all have to switch with it, right?
It's 2021. You're in DC. Are you trying to get us canceled by talking about capitalism?
I just, exactly. I think that is the thing is it's like to imagine that, I think society has been more bent towards government since the 2008 crash, right? With the marketplace and the buyouts. And we're so conditioned to thinking about that. And, luckily it's not, I don't know. It's a hard conversation to have because I really don't know where we're headed. And I don't want to get into a socialism, capitalism type thing because I don't believe that debate's even worth having. I don't believe it's a real debate. I'm just saying people have been looking towards the government more and more for solutions instead of where solutions are actually coming from. It's like our priorities or our focus is bent towards problems instead of solutions. And I think, like Pete's saying, the solution is going to come from where the capital
think about
is.
It. Andy and Matt, you guys have worked in DC for I don't know how long. If anybody could probably, can either one of you think of anything that the federal government could do? And maybe there is, is there something the federal government could do tomorrow that could have an appreciable effect?
We're living in the middle of inflation created by tons and tons of stimulus. They can dump cash. That's basically what they can borrow and dump cash. But
it creates the false market then, right? That's the challenge is it's like the organism that is free enterprise then gets a little bit, out of joint. And it so that there's never a time where there's just the right amount, right? It's either excess or it's too much. And it's the same thing that we're seeing with right now. Early. Yeah. It's like, do we go higher because there's this or, so I just remember working in Congress and the government decided to pass a change to daylight savings to extend it. And it was under the guise that it would add more hours so the kids at the school bus would have more
on each end.
And there would be less energy consumption because of, something. So the change went through, everybody was high-fiving. It was not controversial. And then on the back end, everybody got a call from Microsoft saying, Microsoft Calendar does not account for the new change. We've got to update that manually for a software update. It's going to cost the economy $1 billion. Hopefully your calendars, hopefully your calendars don't screw up and misalign because your daylight savings shifted and our software didn't account for what you were going to do. So we've got to go back in and patch the whole system of every business and every member's office in America for the whole schedule, right? So it's like several $1 billion No one saw it coming because no one thought to ask how our software and productivity was run off these things. So buyer beware where you look for the solution. But anyway, Pete, wonderful conversation as always. We thank you for coming on and helping shed some ideas and some light.
We're done?
We got to wrap, man. We'll have you back on.
I think we're done. I didn't even get to my idea of the FDRA prize in logistics innovation. You guys should put up $1 billion to whoever solves the problem.
Can we get a grant from Wayfair?
I don't think so. I don't think so. You guys don't move furniture, so I guess we can start with that.
You can. Well, you can send the letter from Canada down, and that way you won't have to pay any stamp tax, right? You can just do straight through.
That doesn't work that way. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Pete, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it, folks. This is Shoe and Show covering the biggest topic I think that we're going to be facing for many, many years. And I guess it's just kind of an eye-awakening thing to think about how the solution is going to come from within an organization looking at every single bit of the operation, right? It's going to look at how your consumer's changing. It's going to look at your product changes, where you're going to make the product, how long your development cycle is, what software you like. The supply chain challenges are going to exist, the costs are going to exist, and you got to find solutions elsewhere around that until those smart people Pete's talking about come up with some other solutions to solve things that you cannot, you don't have the power or the strength to address on your own. So there's a lot of stoicism, I think, in this. It's like control what you can control and let go of what you can't. And hopefully, you figure out a way forward that creates those margins and still has that dynamic product. But with that, again, shoeandshow.com is our website. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everything else underneath the sun that's audio. We appreciate you listening. If there's questions about this, drop us a line, info@FDRA. We're your footwear industry association. 95% of the whole industry are members. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., we get on the phone. We get carriers on. We get the ports on. We get warehouses on. We get truckers on to talk about what's happening on the ground, just to give updates and insights. It's a lot of therapy that's taking place, shoe therapy. We're happy to do that. Everybody's in the same boat, even if there aren't that many boats because of consolidation. So, with that, thanks again. Until next time, Shoe-In's out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.